Jane Stewart Smith became a Christian through Dr. Francis Schaeffer and served for a number of years under his leadership while living in Swiss L'Abri. She left a highly successful opera career and joyfully embraced missionary life alongside the Schaeffers. Her heart is thankful to know that the message of flaming truth of the Bible that Dr. Schaeffer so clearly proclaimed is being preserved by Dr. Little and the Schaeffer Foundation.
I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior on April 2, 1956, in the fields above Waymo with Francis Schaeffer present. And then I have the 4 questions he asked me. Do you believe in the existence of the triune God of the Bible as creator? Do you believe that before a holy God you are a guilty sinner? Do you believe in the existence in history of the virgin birth, bodily resurrection, his death and atonement for man? Do you believe he did this for you? And at the end he says, thank him for it.
Well, now let's talk about Francis Schaeffer.
I'd love to.
So you tell me, what would you like to say about Francis Schaeffer?
He was a profound intellect, but not just an intellect. That's the big thing, I think. He really had a compassion and a concern for people in a way that I've not seen before. And he was very energetic. He was very intense and could get depressed listening to people's stories. Yes. But I'll tell you, the secret of Francis Schaeffer was Edith Schaeffer. She was the one behind him to keep him going in every way. She was just incredible, really. He'd just stay up real late and get up late in the morning, and then you'd say, Edith, where's my breakfast? But I don't know how she wrote so many things. I said, Edith, when did you have time to write all these books? She says, well, I didn't sleep much. So when he was asleep, she would write her books.
My.
I remember one other thing. I remember no one had recorded his, he had these discussions, Saturday night discussions, and no one had ever thought to record them. And he certainly didn't want it, I'm sure. But they snuck a microphone into the plant nearby, and that's the way it started.
We have all of those.
I bet you do.
Yes.
They're wonderful.
I can't wait to get to the library and the archives and listen to some of them. We're going to digitize all of them.
That is wonderful.
Just to make sure that way to preserve them.
Absolutely
yes,
great.
We're going to.
I'm delighted because they ask a lot of hard questions.
So would you have been in those meetings?
Oh, yes.
So tell me, what were they like?
Well, they ask impossible questions, and he'd think back, and he just could answer in the most direct way. He had these discussions in the chapel on Saturday night, and all the students would be there and ask sometimes very foolish questions, but nonetheless good questions.
Some people have said that he had a quick temper.
Yes, he did.
And
prone to depression.
Yes.
And Edith held him up, yes. Really. I think his depression was because he saw the problems of the world in such a profound way.
Yes. And
he was really like an Old Testament prophet, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
He was prophesying what was ahead, and he would take these long walks, and think and think and think. But he was quick-tempered, but I think it was part of his intellect, I guess.
Deborah tells the story of one time that there was somebody visiting. It was a family member, maybe a niece, a nephew, I forget, and he had spoken to her harshly. He was in a hurry to get to the train station.
Sure. Yes.
And he just said, get out of my way, in a very harsh way. But Deborah says when he got to the train station, he called the young lady back and said, I'm sorry. Would that be indicative?
I'm not sure I should. Well, I think I'll tell you this
Go
story,
ahead.
if you don't mind.
I don't.
Well, Edith, she was not always on time. He was on time, And Edith came with her hair. They were going to the airport, and Edith, her hair was streaming down and so forth. And so they motored on down. They had someone driving them. And then as they were getting near Geneva, no, it was near Lausanne, he said, Edith, did you bring your air ticket? She forgot. And he said, get out of the car. And he drove off and left her standing. Fortunately, some other people that were Labrie were following, and they picked her up. So when she got to the airport, he said, oh, Edith, you're wonderful. Now, that's an absolute fact. He was very human.
And I think that's what drew people to him, don't you, in some ways?
Yes, right.
He had such a profound understanding of humanity.
Absolutely, and very warm, really. Mm-hmm. Not austere and intellectual, but really compassionate is the word I always think of when I think of him.
So what are some of the favorite memories that you have? I know you say there are so many, and I'm sure there
well,
are.
Well, I have to say two things, and I'll say one at a time. We needed, we had the church services in their chalet, yes. And it got more and more crowded all the time. And I said, well, we need a chapel. But before that, there was a man who lived next door to me, Mr. Langasher. We call him the bee man. And I would sing every day, though I wasn't singing out in public. And he used to love to hear the singing. And finally, a windstorm blew off part of our roof. And he came and restored it. He was German, Swiss, so I spoke to him in German, and Betty spoke to him in French. And we got to know each other, and he loved the singing. And I gave him a Bible, and he accepted the Lord as his Savior and joined our church and was baptized. And then one night we were sitting there, and he said, what you need is a chapel. And he said, I think you need it, and I am going to build it. And he built the chapel, he and his brother, on land that he gave to Labrie. So that's part of you'll find it in the song from Labrie.
Oh, okay.
But he was a very dear, dear friend, and I had Bible studies with him. But he was an older man, and he had been a cheesemaker, but couldn't live in Geneva because of his heart. Well, then I thought, now, we really need an organ in this chapel. Oh dear, and I thought, well, I'm going to get chickens and sell eggs. And I did. And we got a magnificent Flendrop organ that is down there to this day.
Yes, I've seen it.
So there are things that I remember very well.
As the man, we hear some things being said by others,
right,
that doesn't seem to make sense to me. It doesn't square with the man I think right. I knew. Do you think there's any truth in those accusations that Frank makes, for example?
No. I'm horrified.
Yes.
Absolutely horrified. I can remember sitting at the table at the Les having dinner, and Edith suddenly leaving the table. She went every night to read to him. And I can see Francis Schaeffer holding him in his arms at the dinner table. They couldn't have been more affectionate to this boy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he was a great friend of ours, but he had a little boyish streak in him. Edith was famous for her chicken, so everyone was going to have chicken on Sunday. Well, he got the salt shakers and put soap into the, soap. And so everyone was putting soap on their chickens. Whenever he got in trouble, which was often, he would come to us. We were his Labrie. So I have the wonderful memories of him, but I don't know, it's just hard to even talk.
So when Francis preached, what was that like when you would
Oh,
go
it
to
was
church?
magnificent. He was very loud, very intense, and saying things that you never had thought of before. He was, to me, I thought he was very original and very biblically orientated and very inspired, I think.
If I were to give you an opportunity to speak to the world, what would you want to say about Francis Schaeffer?
Well, I think I would certainly say one thing. He's like an Old Testament prophet, Jeremiah in particular, who wept over Jerusalem, and he was weeping over what he saw ahead for this country, and that he had a deep, profound concern and compassion for what was going on. And he warned us. He warned us that we were going in the wrong direction. And he just knew things like nobody. He wasn't a great reader. Of course, the Bible was just basic to everything. But he was a great intellect. You just knew that.
As L'Abri got better known, did that change anything? I mean, when it first starts out, there are only a few people coming.
Right.
Do things start to change? Do you see a change in Francis when it gets larger?
I just think he was intent on this one thing of loving people and wanting them to know Christ. And I don't think that ever changed. No, I don't.
I've been told that if a number of people were at L'Abri, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, that he might be out under a tree sitting just talking with one person.
That's absolutely right. That's what he did to me. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I'll tell you one thing. We were sitting at the table, and there was a clock, you know, with the glass reflection, and I saw it was raining outside. It looked like tears. And I thought, that's me. And right after that, he took me on the spiritual walk, and I accepted Christ as my Savior.
So I know the 4 questions he asked you.
Right.
That must have been more at the end of the walk.
Yeah, that's right.
So what was going on as the walk started? Do you remember?
Well, he was talking about Abraham and Isaac.
Okay.
That God had called Abraham to sacrifice his son, which is a foreview of God not sparing his son.
Yes.
But that the angel came and, but the thing that Francis Schaeffer said, which was the thing that was the final expression, he said, Jane, do you know that Abraham was called of God? He didn't spare his own son, but Abraham was able to spare his son. He said, they both took place on the same mountain range, the crucifixion and Abraham and Isaac. And I knew this is the God of history. I'm a reader. I've read all my life a great deal. And I knew this was the God of history. It was just as clear as if he spoke to me from heaven almost.
You say that he was an intellect, and everybody, I think, agrees. But when he spoke with you, did it seem like you were having some intellect speak to you?
No. It was very personal, one-to-one. No, not really. And it was biblically centered, but not in a shouting way or anything. It was just a very sure, simple question.
I've heard people say, well, he would ask you questions and then listen to how you answered them. Did you experience that?
Absolutely.
So much?
Yes, he was a listener. Yes, indeed. And then he would think about it first. He didn't answer too quickly, but he was thinking about the right answer.
So what was it like living at L'Abri?
Actually, Betty had bought this where I lived, sight unseen, so that the Schaeffers would move there because it was so busy at Melez. She thought they could move down there, which they didn't do.
Right.
So when I went there in 1960, they put me in charge of Schaeffer. And I tell you, it was a very busy place. Finally, Betty Carlson came. She lived away for the week, but came on Saturdays, so she could help. But we had everyone Saturday night, I think I mentioned. But then all the other things, the lectures, I had to lecture a great deal. and talking. I was one of the tutors, and then a lot of correspondence, endless correspondence. And as international secretary, that was another big part of it. But and of course, he would lead all these meetings, whether they were in Holland or England or Italy, wherever.
We have inventoried all of the pieces that were sent to us in the collection.
Right.
And I think the number is somewhere close to 50,000 pieces. Much of that correspondence.
That's just incredible.
Yes.
Marvelous. Well, I remember after I became a Christian, I was living in Milan, Italy. That's where opera singers often are. And I was still singing opera. And I said, well, do you think you could come and talk to some of my opera friends? And he and Edith did come. And that was the beginning of the L'Abri branch, which went on for a long time.
What would he say when he came? I mean, he's talking to opera singers. What would he say? Do you remember?
Well, I guess he'd talk to, I'm an opera singer, and he'd talk to me, so I guess he'd talk to, but he'd have a class in the Hotel Florida, which was near the railroad station. And they would ask questions, and it was just very intense. I will say that when you're with him, it's very, really serious.
Jane, tell me, why should young people know about Francis Schaeffer?
Oh, if they really want to know life at the way the Lord wants us to live life. So many are so doubtful these days. I think he's, as I keep saying, you need the Scriptures, and he is the greatest hero of Scriptures I know, and he can open it up like no one I know.
Deborah says that he used to say, if anybody wants to know what I believe, let him read my Bible. And as you can see...
Just that straightforward.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was speaking to a book club that had started back in 1929 in Wake Forest. They'd asked me to come and speak, and they wanted me to speak on Schaeffer.
Great.
So I brought the Bible, and we passed it around, and they said, it looks like he wrote a second Bible.
Oh, my.
I mean, notes everywhere.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And of course, when his sermons was always, he had the Bible and cited this and that and the other all through his sermons.
Well, tell me something about Edith.
She's just so amazing. I love her so dearly. Very energetic, very caring, and very supportive of her husband, and working all the time. She would, I think I told you, but may I repeat it?
Sure you may.
Well, she would tell the L'Abri story. When I got there, it was the L'Abri story of that time that they had been put out and brought here by the Lord and so on. Well, Betty Carlin said, Edith, you're going to keep telling this story. You've got to write it down. And you've got to go away to a hotel. Don't answer the telephone. Don't do anything but write that book. And Betty paid for her going to the hotel. And she wrote the L'Abri story. But then the manuscript sat under her bed for 5 years. But Edith always said it's a good thing because Francis Schaeffer's first 2 books came out before that. So she was, but she's just bright and warm and loving. She's just so kind and very beautiful spirit. I just can't say enough for Edith. I do care so much for her.
As we now look at the years that have passed, Francis died in 1984.
That's right.
Edith is in her late 90s.
96.
96.
And she knows we're here today. So
does she?
I called her this morning.
Oh, well, good.
Yes.
Good.
She's praying for us.
Well, wonderful. And my concern is that if we don't do something like we're doing today,
Right.
we're losing a very important part of our Christian legacy.
Absolutely.
Somebody who can tell the story, Jane, who is not telling it because they heard it from somebody else, but because you lived it.
Right, absolutely.
And I just want you to tell me anything you think we need to be, we need to know, that should not be lost about Schaeffer. You've told me about his commitment to the Bible, his love for humanity, his burden for the lost. Anything else that you think?
Well, this is just funny, and I've said it before, but I will say it again. They really loved he just loved Edith like nothing I've ever seen. He was completely dependent on her. And of course, she loved him so much. But when they first got married, I think Edith said, well, and then after they were, in Waymo and so forth, she said one day, well, I expected to feed some people, but I didn't know Fran would bring so many people to eat with us.
Now, would you be up there like on a Sunday afternoon?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes. She had high tea, and we'd all be there.
Mm-hmm. And students would come up and be a part of that?
Absolutely. Everyone would have high tea.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And what would the conversation be like? Would it be everything spiritual, or would there be other kind of conversation?
It would be informal.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I remember one of those, the thing that I remember before I became a Christian, they were having a Bible study on Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And of course, John chapter 3.
Yes.
And that was part of it. That was part of it, of my really coming to believe. But that was the chapter they were studying.
So you were not a believer at first.
No.
But how did they treat you?
Well, Debbie said to her mother, a real live opera singer. And they couldn't have been sweeter.
Yes.
And I suddenly realized, they're missionaries. Like missionaries. But they were so dear and so sweet. And at they always end up reading the Bible and singing hymns. I said, oh, they're always singing hymns. But they were so loving that I just suddenly realized, well, missionaries must be rather nice after all. But I just fell in love with them, really.
And as I've read, it seems to me that prayer was a very important part of this ministry. You want to say something?
Absolutely. Edith came, as you know, from the China Inland Mission, and that was a tremendous part of that. And Amy Carmichael and George Mueller, those three, all three of those. And they all lived by faith, not asking others for support. So prayer was a very key thing, and we had a day of prayer every week on Monday. And everyone would sign up for a length of time. So it was a prayer all through the day. And that was very key to the whole of and then we'd have a prayer meeting on Monday night. And
you were there, well, you came a little bit after this. After 55, you came in, what, 60?
56.
You came in 56.
April the 2nd, 56.
Oh, my. So you come right after they moved to
Waymo.
Waymo.
Exactly 1 year after it started.
I understand things were not easy.
Oh, I think they were very, very difficult. Indeed not. They were not easy one bit, no. And they're not easy now either, with the dollar in tatters.
Yeah, that's right.
But they held fast, and they never have asked for money. Now that is rare.
Yes, it is.
You'll never get a request for money from Labrie. Even in the prayer letters, they don't out and out say that.
Yes. And I know that when he left the mission in 55, and they just purposed in their heart that they would not send out a letter to ask for money.
That's absolutely correct.
They just went before the Lord.
And that's exactly what they did.
What amazes,
that never changed.
You know what amazes me, Jane, is that somewhere I have read, maybe in a letter or somewhere, where maybe in an interview, Schaeffer says, well, we aren't telling everybody you have to live this way.
That's absolutely correct.
But this is the way, this is God's leading in our lives.
That's exactly right. He said other missions, if they need to do it, that's fine. It's just our unique calling. He always said that, so that other people wouldn't feel uneasy that they were doing something wrong.
So he didn't make it a standard for everybody.
No, not at all.
No.
It was their unique calling.
And if you came to L'Abri and you weren't a Christian,
And they're still coming.
and they're still coming, yes?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. They're still coming.
All over nations.
Yes. They've got L'Abris everywhere.
You know, I read my Bible every day, and I was reading the other day. Edith loves Isaiah. I read through every year, but I was reading Isaiah chapter 2, and those first 5 verses are Edith's vision of L'Abri. And shall I read them?
Sure, please.
Well, and I told Edith that, and I've got her name written here. But that was her vision of L'Abri, and I just thought the other night, I'm amazed that I'm reading this, but it's right here, chapter 2, and I'll read these 5 verses.
Yes.
And I've got L'Abri, JSS, and Edith over here. The word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come you, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come ye and let us walk in the light of the Lord. And that's Edith's vision. So I think it's just wonderful.
And come to pass. I mean, I know there's a future day when that's going to happen, but
It is now.
it is now.
Right.
Yes.
People from every nation, just amazing, really.
Yes.
Right.
I know what it meant for me when I became a Christian. I was told that you don't need to use your mind.
Right.
You just have faith.
Oh,
Yes.
disastrous.
Yes.
Oh, dear.
That's exactly.
Oh, dear.
Exactly.
Well, that never came from him.
No,
for
it
sure.
did not.
He wants you
And-
to use your mind and think it through.
And in 1980, I read, and I'm not sure where I read it, he said something to the effect, you don't have to commit intellectual suicide to be a Christian.
Absolutely.
And I felt like I was saved all over again.
That's what, and he kept saying, choose life.
Yeah.
And we'd say that to students who would come, choose life.
And I'm sure for those of you who knew him far, far, far better than I did,
Right.
that when he died, I probably shed more tears
Oh, my.
than for my own father.
Absolutely. Oh, my. Of
It had
course.
meant that much to me
Right.
as a young man. Well, not
Right.
so young in those
Oh,
days,
my.
but it meant so much to me.
Right.
And I can't tell you what a privilege it is to be here speaking with you today.
Well, there's not a better topic in the world for me. I don't always get this opportunity.
Well, I'm
I
delighted.
do teach a Bible class.
You still teach a Bible class?
Yes, I do. I've been doing it ever since I came back
My.
in our church.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to say?
I'm just thinking there are 1 or 2 things that I think might be interesting. Well, you knew he was brilliant,
Yes.
but that didn't interfere with his compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, he went on these speaking engagements in many places, and often I was the soloist. So I heard him in many different places. England and even Calgary and all those different places. So, but towards the end, he just needed to be himself and be alone on the stage.
Okay. Did you ever come to a group that he spoke at that they were hostile, where they didn't respond well to what he had to say?
I'm sure of that. And for me, I had a hostile meeting. I'll have to tell you this. I was lecturing on Handel, my favorite, down in the chapel and lecturing. And this hippie, I forget his name, came up and said, "Well, what's wrong? Why don't you like Jimi Hendrix?" And on he went and just wouldn't let me finish almost stopped my lecture. And I just got so mad at him, and he was just so disruptive. Well, later, after he'd become a Christian, he came and said, "Jane, will you forgive me, and will you sing in my wedding?" So there were hostile people. I'm sure of that.
Yes.
Right. But he was patient to a certain extent.
Well, I only saw him the one time, lecture publicly. And I saw that. I saw a deep, abiding compassion.
Absolutely.
For the truth.
Yes.
And for the humanity that so desperately needed that truth.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've seen How Should We Then Live?
Yes.
Well, I did the music part of that.
Did you?
And they flew me to London and different places and so on. But I think it's a wonderful series.
It is, and Jane, it's still being used.
I'm so glad.
Around the world.
That is that was Frankie's idea.
Yes, it was. And I think maybe Francis wasn't too keen on it.
I don't think he was. That's right. And there was no library around, but I happened to have quite a library.
Yes.
So they used my books quite a bit. But that's a wonderful series.
Yes. We still show it at the seminary.
Good.
And they have the little interview now the new one has that little interview at the end where Frankie interviews Edith and Francis.
Wonderful.
And that's a very interesting interview, because by that time Francis knows he has cancer.
Yes.
And he's not going to do well. It's going to bring an end to his life.
Absolutely.
And he has such very interesting things to say. So those are the only times that I've heard Francis respond to questioning. But we're certainly looking forward to listening to all these tapes.
And the thing is, even if the question was almost silly, he really took time to think it through. He didn't just quickly answer, but he really felt the need of being serious about whatever the question.
In the little book that we did, I forget who says, maybe it's Os Guinness.
Yes.
Or maybe it was Timothy George, maybe David Wells, but one of them, who said what set him apart was he took humanity seriously. He took the Bible seriously. And that makes a unique man.
I have to tell you one thing about Oz.
Yes.
I first met him. I sent him, and I didn't know who it was. I sent him up to clean out my chicken house. That's how I met Oz Guinness. Oh, dear.
But think of the tremendous influence.
I know it.
From that little place in Waymo, the people who have gone out and influenced so many other places.
It's just glorious, absolutely glorious.
Yes.
And Greg Lauer is my dear friend. He's the head of Swiss Library.
Yes.
And he knows about this meeting today.
Yes.
I speak to him pretty often.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, I am honored
to
be able to talk about what I love so much.
This interview was conducted at the home of Jane Stewart Smith in Roanoke, Virginia on September 9, 2011.